This week I want to tell a story of a recent incident I had on my Indian Challenger, but I'm also going to get on my soapbox for a bit and discuss a comment that a viewer left recently on one of my videos because it relates to this story. So let's start with my story and what happened. I was riding south of Fort Worth on the interstate, and this was out and away from the city, so the traffic was fairly light. As I looked ahead, the sky was pitch black, and I could feel the temperatures dropping. So I was headed directly into a storm, and it looked like from where I was at, it was going to be, pretty heavy rain. I knew there were storms in the area or going to be that day. Where I was headed to was someplace in particular. It wasn't just a pleasure ride, so I had little choice but to keep going on my current path. But like a good Boy Scout, I had been prepared, and I had rain gear in the saddlebag of the motorcycle. I just had to find a place to pull over to put that on. I looked down at the GPS, and I saw ahead of me, maybe half a mile or so, whenever I saw an exit ramp that looked like it would be a quick off the highway, put on the rain gear, and get back on the highway. At this point, where I was on the road was still dry. It hadn't rained at all. But when I decided to take that exit, about a tenth of a mile maybe before I got to that exit, the roads were wet. So it wasn't actively raining, but it had rained pretty good where I was at this point, and the roads were fairly wet. Enough so that the cars ahead of me were lifting some spray up off the highway, but it wasn't actively raining, as I said. So I saw the exit ramp and a sign for it that said it was a 50-mile-per-hour exit. And to the best of my memory, I slowed down to about 40 to 45 miles per hour once I saw that ramp. I did slow down some because I realized that the roads were wet, but I still wasn't in a full rain mode. I wasn't mentally prepared for that rain. And I'm guessing because it wasn't actively raining at that time, I was still thinking I was riding into the rain, not taking for granted that I was actually in the rain because the roads were wet. And that was my first mistake, because here's what I didn't know about the exit ramp that I was headed for. Just to the right of that ramp was a huge landfill. I mean, one of those mountain-type landfills. Had a dirt road leading up to this top of this landfill, and all day, every day, garbage trucks were taking this exit off of the freeway. They were leaking bacon grease and cooking oil and who knows what else leaks out of the back of those garbage trucks. And they left a slime on top of the road. To add to the problems, the trucks had been coming down off of that landfill and that dirt road all day, and they left a layer of dirt, which was now mud, on the surface of the road. So I had all the stuff that was dripping from the truck added to that dirt and now mud in a lightly damp road, one that wasn't enough rain to wash everything away, but enough to make it all wet for sure. The actual exit ramp was not too bad, but when I got on the 50-mile-per-hour access road, it was covered in this muck that was now mixed up with the brief rain that had saturated the entire area. The access road had a turn to the right that under normal circumstances, it was kind of a gradual turn to the right, and under normal circumstances, it wouldn't have been a problem to take that at 50 miles per hour, but these were far from normal circumstances. So once I got on top of this mess on the road, this muck on the road, I knew for sure that it was going to be slick, but I didn't read it prior to getting on it, which was my second mistake. So I reached out for the front brake, and I tried to gently squeeze that front brake to squeeze off a little bit of speed, and I could feel resistance on that brake lever, but I got zero stopping power. That was the first thing that really got my attention. It's kind of a weird feeling when you're going down the road and you squeeze on that brake and you can feel the resistance in that hand, but nothing happens, no traction, nothing to slow the bike down. What had happened, the ABS immediately kicked in and it took away any of the brakes to keep me from dumping the bike over. Both front and rear brakes were now gone. And it was a weird feeling. There was no vibration in the brake handle at all, but I could, like I said, I could feel that resistance in the handle, but there was no slowing down at all when I tried this. So this curve was fast approaching, and I wasn't slowing down one bit. I still had some slight pressure, I think, on the front brakes as I attempted to negotiate the corner. And as soon as I leaned that bike over slightly, I could feel the front tire kind of slip and then instantly straighten right back up. So I'd gone from regular ABS to quartering ABS, and it was doing its job again, keeping me upright, but it still wasn't helping me slow down in the least. Now, I realized I was not going to make this corner, and I tried to straighten the bike up and just brake more aggressively this time. This time I used a little more pressure on the front brake and the rear brake. I could still feel resistance from that brake lever, but again, zero actual stopping power. I was still plowing full speed ahead. So I was in a tough spot here. I was quickly running out of road. I couldn't turn. I couldn't stop or even slow down, and I was still going between 40 and 45 miles per hour. What would you do in that situation? And I've seen riders state in the comments, and some actual motorcycle YouTube personalities state they would jump off the motorcycle. I've seen other riders state that they would intentionally lay the bike down, but I don't know how that would be possible with this ABS because you couldn't get it to slide at all. And besides that, I've never thought it was a good idea to intentionally cause a crash to avoid a potential crash. There's even one guy on YouTube, Scotty Kilmer, who says he would lay the bike down and ride it like a surfboard. And I don't know if you've seen that video or not. It's made the rounds a little bit. Don't ever take any motorcycle advice from this guy if he's willing to provide that as actual advice. So before I tell you what I actually did and the outcome, let's address a recent comment on one of my videos because it relates to this story. A few weeks ago, I released a video titled "Practice Does Not Make Perfect." In that video, I stressed the importance of getting training and continuing training. I stressed the importance of follow-up training above and beyond the basic rider course and how a rider will soon forget what they learned in a class if it's not reinforced. Reinforcement can be taken by other formal training classes or just by practice in the field guide to keep those memories sharp and your skills sharp on your motorcycle so that you can reinforce what you've learned. In response to that video, a rider left a long comment, and I'll summarize some of the main points from this comment. And understand, I'm not picking on this rider. The only reason I'm really mentioning it is because I've heard very similar comments before, and I know if I've heard it from multiple people, then multiple people are thinking the same thing. So let's address some of these comments. The comment began with, "Your assumptions of training is only done in a parking lot bothers me." He went on to say, "Your assumptions of rider forgetting what they learned in a year is also bothering me." He said, "Your assumptions of riders, new or experienced, can't retain what they learned from a basic rider course is bothersome to me and, frankly, an insult." He said, "I don't need to practice on an open parking lot to be proficient in riding my Gull Wing. Every day I ride, I'm practicing my skills," he said, "I learned back in the basic course back in 1978. And we'll skip down through his comment a little bit because, like I said, it was a little bit long. He said, "The 2 times that we got rear-ended on our bike, we could never practice in any location at any time." So let's address this comment with 3 points, and then we'll finish my story and how they relate. First, it's patently false to say that you remember everything from one training class that has happened now 45 years ago. Unless you're some kind of savant with a remarkable memory, your recollection is missing large chunks from that class, and it has distorted a whole lot of the other things that you think you remember clearly. That's natural. That's not a pick on you. That's just human nature. I feel I can make that statement with 99.99999% assurance. Second, aside from the fact that training on a parking lot or in a class allows you to practice many times emergency braking, U-turn, swerving, brake and escape, and a whole other host of skills that you'll not encounter on a daily basis while riding on the street. So I can get on a parking lot, I could practice emergency braking 20 times within 20 minutes, and I may ride 20 years before I would practice that many times out on the street. But you need those skills when you need them on the street, and if you've not reinforced them in training or with practice, they won't be there when you need them and when it really counts out on the street. Sure, you're reinforcing your braking skills when you stop at a stop sign during a normal stop, but few riders are dying because they don't know how to stop at a stop sign making a leisurely stop. They're dying because they fail to stop quickly in an emergency when they have to stop for a car that pulled out in front of them. Third, you said this: the 2 times we got rear-ended on our bike, we could never, and that was all in caps, practice in any, all in caps, location at any time. The words in all caps from this quote were from the commenter, not added by me. So let's address this comment. Here's some things that you learn or you should have learned in a training class about getting rear-ended, but maybe you forgot. Did you stop far enough from the car in front of you to allow for an escape route? Did you have an escape route? Were you positioned within your lane at the stop to quickly get to your planned escape route? Do you check your mirrors every time you slow down or stop, especially when there's still traffic moving behind you? If you had done all or any of these, then maybe this parking lot training exercise that's taught in a pro rider class could have been used to avoid the crash that has now happened to you on 2 different occasions. Add to that, training classes often talk about the advantages of adding additional lights to your motorcycle, flashing your brake lights to get the driver's attention, or wearing visible riding gear to make yourself more visible on the road. You state that your crash could never be avoided with practice or training, and I've listed 8 different things off the top of my head that training in this YouTube channel will teach you to avoid the exact situation that you have found yourself in 2 times. Even if there's not an exact parking lot exercise that we can practice for every condition that we'll find out on the road, the skills that we do practice have a huge indirect effect on how we handle hazardous situations on the road. Now, I agree with you, not every crash can be avoided, and it is possible, though highly suspect, that both of your times you were truly a victim, that you could have done nothing about the crash. But the vast majority of crashes occur when our mistakes or lapse of mental awareness meet with road conditions or a driver's mistakes and a host of other circumstances. All those things meet at a certain point on the road at a certain time of day, and it results in a crash. But to state that there was nothing you could do about it is incredibly short-sighted, and it dooms the rider to be susceptible to the same mistakes over and over. So let's see how this writer's comment relates to my story as I climb down from my soapbox now. So up to this point in my story, I was guilty of 3 main things. I knew that the road was wet and I didn't adjust my riding style enough to accommodate for it. I failed to read the road and the conditions on the road before I was on top of it. And probably my biggest mistake was that my mind had not transitioned fully from riding in dry, high traction conditions to riding in slick and wet conditions, especially how slick the conditions were that I was riding into. Mentally, the rain was still something that was ahead of me, something that I was pulling off the road to prepare for, but in reality, as soon as that water was on the road, I was in rain conditions, and to make it worse, I was hitting those rain conditions at the slickest possible time on a horrible road that was dripping with goo from all these trucks. So I tried to slow down, but no go. I tried to corner, but no go. I tried to stop, but no go. So here's where my training paid off. First, I was totally calm and in the moment. I didn't panic at all. Second, I knew that I couldn't stop or complete the turn, so I looked ahead of me to see if there was a curb or something lining the side of the road. There was no curb, just a smooth transition from the side of the road to the pavement to off-road. And third, I looked ahead into that field I was headed into to see if there was anything off the road that I needed to try to avoid. Something like a tree or a sign. It was clear from what I could tell, but the grass and weeds were about 3 feet tall, so anything below that level I couldn't see. So it was really a grown-up area that I was headed into. I knew I was headed off-road, and it was potentially going to be a rough ride. The very last thing that I remember while I was still on the pavement was saying to myself, relax. And I immediately felt my shoulders drop and relax. I felt my arms relax. I felt my hands on the hand grips relax. And I tightened my knees up on the tank. That was training. I looked across the grassy wide area straight ahead of me where I was hoping to be in a few seconds and not down at the front tire. That was training. I went off of the edge of the road into the tall grass at about 40 miles per hour, I'm guessing. The initial sound was loud as I heard this pop, 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 as the tall weeds bounced off the bike and I plowed my way into it. I felt the handlebars moving back and forth as the front tire looked for a path of travel. Because my grip on the handlebars was loose, that front tire found a path through. My biggest concern was a large hole or something that I couldn't see that might be hidden in that grass, but I couldn't do anything about that, so I stayed relaxed on the top of the motorcycle. And it's amazing how tall grass and soft riding surface like this can slow a bike down in a hurry, and it wasn't no time at all that I was down to 10 miles per hour and still upright, but still in the middle of this thicket. So somewhere between when I went off of the road and where I found myself now, I had downshifted to first gear, and I still had the clutch squeezed in, though I have no memory of doing that at all, getting it down into first gear. Again, that was training. I realized I needed to continue my forward momentum, or I potentially might get stuck out in the middle of this field, so I released the clutch slowly, and I rode my Indian Challenger through the off-road challenge in a manner that would have made a BMW GS proud. I'm sure I was quite the sight riding through that thick brush, out the other side of this exit ramp. I rode to the other side of the tall grass, maybe 30 yards back onto the pavement, found the perfect place to pull over and put my rain gear on. So once I got the bike parked, I walked around it, making sure there wasn't any damage. The only thing that I could find was a ton of grass and weeds stuck in the fairings and the passenger floorboards as I weed whacked my way through that jungle. I look back at my off-road experience, looking to see where I'd just come from, and you could see a clear path where I'd parted the weeds and plowed right through all of this mess on the side of the road. My first thoughts on this situation were not how the road conditions let me down or how slick the road was. I wasn't angry at the trucks for leaving that heavy film on the road. My thoughts were, how can I correct this? What should I have done differently? If I had to take this same exact exit ramp again, knowing what I know now, how would I do it differently the second time? Because if we don't learn from our mistakes, we're doomed to repeat them over and over. When it comes to crashes and close calls, yes, there will be other contributing factors outside of your control. Yes, there are drivers, road conditions, or situations that we have no control over. Sometimes drivers cut us off. Sometimes they fail to stop or yield. But I have found if I take care of what is under my control and then train and practice for the circumstances that are not under my control, I'm a much safer rider. In this instance, there were some things that I could have handled that I didn't, and hopefully I've learned from my mistakes. So my challenge to you, learn from your mistakes and always continue to develop your skills and then practice them. That's the only way that I know of to reduce our risk on the road. Till next week, guys, it's Kevin with MCrider, and I'll see you on the road.